What's up, everybody? Today I'm here to review X-Men The Last Stand. This was the third movie in the original trilogy back in the early 2000s. It was released on May 26th of 2006. It was directed by Brett Ratner for 20th Century Fox. And this movie has a bit of a legacy for it. Most of it is negative. It was, if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it has about a 57%, I think, was what it was the other day when I looked. And it's about 50-50. I think a lot of people take it away negatively. The bad parts about this movie are really bad, but there's also some good stuff. Actually, it's my first time going back and watching this recently, looking at it through more of a critical lens, or more of a critic lens, if you will, to kind of see what is it as bad as people made it out to be. I know at the time I was only probably 13, and I was really jacked for this movie. I remember I moved my birthday party a couple of weeks late because my birthday is in May, but this movie came out May 26th. I remember it was Memorial Day weekend, so we went on the Friday night, and me and all my friends, we went there and saw this movie. I was really excited about it, and I remember liking it overall, but I was a teenager then, and so it was interesting to go back. I had not seen this movie. I think I did buy it on DVD, but now I remember I still had, or I hadn't seen it in a number of years, but I picked it up watched it the other day, and it was interesting. It wasn't as bad as I was expecting. For those that don't know, or for maybe those that are rejoining or refreshing, X-Men 3: The Last Stand is it's picking up about several months after the events of X2, X-Men United, which was the last movie I reviewed in this series. And it tells the story of this new mutant cure that's out there. The U.S. government, there's now a new president. I guess maybe it's a year or two afterward. There's now a new president, and he's very mutant friendly. And he seems to be. We're told that he's doing a good job of peace. But there's this new cure that's being developed, and from this kid whose name is, I believe, Jamie, and his ability is to, well, basically if mutants get around him, their powers don't work. So that's his ability. This was, and I have not read this group of comics, but I believe Joss Whedon had this storyline in his run. He actually authored a series of X-Men comics called Astonishing X-Men. I believe that's where it's from. I have not read, like I said, I haven't read. I'm still actually going back and revisiting some of the old stuff, the stuff that really built this universe. I had always avoided reading comics because I didn't know, it was not to get off on a tangent. I just didn't know how to jump in and just start, or where. I know a lot of I've met similar people that have the same thing, but eventually I've just discovered some of the big stories have now been put into graphic novels, like the Dark Phoenix story, which is referenced in this movie, as well as God Loves, Man Kills, which is another excellent graphic novel. That was a true graphic novel written, and that one it was partially the basis for X2, which I recommend both of those. And I'm still working my way through some of the older stuff written by Chris Claremont and artist work by John Byrne. You can't beat those two, and just the little I've read so far has been outstanding. But enough about that. Let's get to this movie. So let's go to the good parts. As far as overall thoughts, I'll give you a real quick for those that maybe haven't seen the movie. And this movie is now 14 years old, so we'll dive into spoilers here soon. It's okay. It's fine. I can't say I'm overwhelmingly negative about it, although the bad parts about this movie really make the impression bad. But I will say that it had a lot more good than what I was expecting. Here's the good. I thought the visuals were still pretty good, and we're going to be getting into spoilers here. I mean, the movie's 14 years old. I will say, I guess, if you're looking for a quick thought, if you like the X-Men movies, X-Men 1 and X2, then you should at least watch. You should. I mean, you can get it on it's VOD, so I'm sure you can stream it somewhere, Disney Plus or Hulu. Or you can pay $2 to rent it. It's worth a rent. I'll say that. If it were in theaters, I may be hesitant, but I think it's worth a rent. It's worth watching, adding to the X-Men lore, at least in that sense. It just depends. If you really like the X-Men, You might have some, if you're really if you're a comic reader, you're going to have some pretty big gripes, and I do. And again, I'm still kind of rediscovering the comics myself. I was just a big fan of the animated series, and then just movies being including X3, that was just part of my childhood, so I remember it with fondness. But I can go back and look at the kind of the bad parts of it, and still, some of them really pop out. So if you're an X-Men junkie that knows all this stuff really well, you might have your gripes, and even if you might even have some regular movie gripes too. I think those are there. But if you like the X-Men characters, the actors, and their presence, I think you'll still like this. Anyway, let's dive into it. Okay, the good. I really like the visuals. I thought the de-aging would look really bad, especially now in 2020, but it actually holds up pretty good. And maybe they remastered it. I can't remember. I have the Blu-ray copy, so I don't, or just bought it. So I don't know. Maybe they went through and touched it up a bit, but it still looks pretty convincing, at least to me. If you guys don't think so, let me know. But then I really liked the scene in the danger room. I think that was a nice touch, and it's an introductory scene. I found out later that they wanted to use that, for one, because fans hadn't been able to see it yet. The movies before had intended to do it, but they just couldn't find a place for the danger room. I thought this worked really nice, and also there's a nice little hint of the Sentinel program. For those of you that watch the cartoon series or know X-Men, that's a pretty neat reference. Also, I will say, I listened to the director's commentary, or the directors and writers' commentary, and they did try really hard to leave a lot of Easter eggs and a lot of little hints at parts of X-Men lore. One of the characters in the president's cabinet is named Trask. Boulevard Trask is the creator of the Sentinel program. We see that story played out in Days of Future Past, which we'll get to in a future review. But I thought that was nice, and also I learned of a few other little tidbit of characters that I hadn't even known about, but they were there. They consciously put them in the background, hoping to show people that they were trying to reference it. So I do give them credit there. All right, back to the stuff. We have the performances in this movie are really good. There's some material that gets a little too actiony, action humor for me. But I really like the performances of Hugh Jackman. Of course, he's always going to be known as Wolverine. Kelsey Grammer as the Beast. I know some of you may remember. I know there was a lot of outrage when he was there, but I think he's been accepted. If any of you out there, maybe there's something I'm missing, but I thought he was a really good fit for Beast. He fits, just coming from more. Beast is supposed to be an intelligent, affluent person, and I think Kelsey Grammer fits that perfectly. I don't really know what the big debate was then, but I still think he does an excellent job. Ellen Page as Kitty or Shadowcat, or Kitty Pryde Shadowcat, I think that's great. She does a really good job as being part of the team. They had the character make cameo appearances in the last two movies, but now she's part of the team. I think she works really well. Plus, she fits into the Iceman, Bobby Drake, and Rogue storyline pretty well too. And she could have maybe even had a little more to do. They could have played that out, which that'll tie into another one of the gripes I had about the movie. I like the humans showing, that they've learned over the years of fighting Magneto. Magneto, the big villain of this movie, he wants to stop the cure. The cure, it's kind of a dividing issue. He wants to stop the cure, wants mutants to rule everything. He wants, where the X-Men, they even have a debate within themselves. Storm at one point says, "Why would we need a cure? We're all fine." And Beast says, "Yeah, but it's not so easy for you. You don't shed on the furniture," which is a neat line for him. And it really shows the complex argument, which is why I think overall the movie really likes, or is a better movie for the Cure storyline rather than trying to fit in this Dark Phoenix storyline. But I still will say, despite that, Famke Janssen gives a fantastic performance as Jean Grey. I really I didn't appreciate it at the time. I never really warmed up to Jean Grey at the time when I was a teenager, but now I look back and, man, she played this so well. She actually progressed. I think she got better with every movie, and she's much better. Jennifer Lawrence did what she could. I think that ended up being a mistake, and we'll get to that in future reviews. She actually got worse as the movies went on, and some of that was her fault. Some of that is the creative powers behind the curtain. But I really like Famke Janssen here in Last Stand because she's juggling such a the old Jean, but then you have this new Phoenix, and she has to hit certain points and has to really carry that throughout the time. Plus, just being an unhinged personality and carrying that, I thought she did a great job. Of course, and it's just a great cast overall. Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, those guys can act. They probably forgot more about acting than anybody else could learn, and they're never going to look bad. Although Magneto does get a couple lines that really drive me crazy now, anyway. But I like, humans learning after all these years fighting with Magneto. They've switched over at one point. They switch over to plastic weapons. I think that's great in the Ultimate Battle. Kind of shows that, hey, we got one up on you, Magneto. That was neat. The entire bridge moving sequence of the Golden Gate Bridge, we are in a spoiler territory if you didn't know. Golden Gate Bridge, I think holds up pretty well visually too if you look at that. And it was a pretty big deal back then. At one point, that was actually in the middle of the script, but then Ratner said, look, I'm never going to be able to pull off this big of a set piece ever, and we can't just... I think the original ending was to end, the movie was going to go, story was going to go to DC, and he said, well, a lot of people end their movies in DC, including X-Men 1. I don't want to do that again. Let's make this the final sequence. So you can, agree or disagree. I don't really have an opinion on there. I think it works fine for the ending for this story. I think it was a really well executed sequence. Speaking of Magneto, I think they did a really good job writing the character as a domestic terrorist, adding in touches of him filming those threat videos and showing it on TV. I know it was really made me think back, like that was such a part of the period, I guess, because I remember all of the Osama bin Laden tapes that would appear on news media from time to time after those several years, 10 years, I guess, between 9/11 and when he was eventually caught. So that really hit me this time watching it all these years later, and that it still works really good. It really shows Magneto again. They're fitting it into the modern sense of a domestic terrorist, and it was really relevant back then. Still pretty relevant today, but really works well, and it really pits him as the enemy again. And let's see, as I said, the visuals are pretty good. Battle scenes at the end, the final battle's pretty good. I think there's too many of the Brotherhood. It just kind of seems like this onslaught, and eventually, there's only 5 X-Men, so you would think they would get overwhelmed, and they don't really. To me, I think there's just it wasn't really. They could have done it better, is all I'm saying. It could have done better. At one point, Matthew Vaughn was going to direct this movie. I think it would have been 10 times better than what it is. But before I get off into too much of a tangent, I will say that this X-Men movie feels like the first time where Fox or whoever, the powers that be, decided to make a good X-Men movie, where Bryan Singer was trying to make a good sci-fi movie with X-Men in it, or about the X-Men. That was what his goal was for the first 2 films, was to make a good sci-fi film like anybody else, but it's about the X-Men, where this movie feels more rooted in the idea of being a good X-Men movie with lots of action. So maybe you disagree with that, but I really think it comes through because Ratner knows how to direct action, and he shows it. But he just doesn't seem as well. And he admitted, if you listen to the commentary, he didn't know much about the X-Men lore. He learned enough, and I think he learned enough to hit the high notes and everything, but he doesn't really appreciate it for what it is. Instead, it was just a way to get to the rough, beat 'em up action, and it's kind of the action comedy humor that we kind of get in that third act. And that leads me into some of the negatives. I think the creative decision to kill off both Cyclops and Professor X does not sit well, and it still doesn't sit well with me. It was people criticized it at the time, really criticize it still now. I know there was a logistical problem. James Marsden, or Cyclops, he was taken away by Bryan Singer, the former director of the X-Men. He did not direct X-Men 3 because he wanted to go make Superman Returns. We all know how that turned out. And he took James Marsden with him. And so they had to kill off Cyclops in the beginning, or he asked to be. I'm not sure if he asked to be killed off or if the studio decided. I do know the studio decided that there needed to be a death in the first half, and that is what led to Charles Xavier being killed off, which really doesn't sit well. They executed it believably and an okay time, but I just don't see how you can have the X-Men without the X. And even if you set up in future movies, where do you go? Where, if they would have continued on, where would they have went? They have no X, and they didn't go, and they didn't necessarily have any plan, but they and besides, if you watch to the end of the credits, they undercut it anyway. So what was the deal? What was the point? The payoff? There was no. It was a payoff to then be undercut and said, but he's still alive. So I don't know. It's just this thing, this era of movies that this movie came from, and they're still today. They go that distance and then they just can't commit to it. At least if you're gonna kill him off, keep him dead. But instead, no, he's still alive, and we're gonna undercut it at the end. But it's and I get it, and they kind of did that with Jean. They killed her off, but they didn't have plans to bring her back, and that's the problem here. Is they didn't really. You can just tell that Dark Phoenix storyline is it. There just doesn't seem to be an overall plan. And look, you can talk about now as I'm recording this. We can talk about Star Wars and how that's not planned, and how other trilogies aren't planned. This trilogy definitely was not planned out. But at least the first two movies, they at least connected pretty well together. But then you get to The Last Stand, and it's like, hey, you know what? We should do the Dark Phoenix storyline. We can bring Jean Grey back, and that's probably that's fine. I mean, it's believable enough because they explained it by saying, well, her powers put her in a cocoon. Okay, but Professor X, why would you kill him off? I still don't. Again, how can you have the X-Men without the X? Anyway, that's just me. Maybe you guys someone out there has a better take on it. I understand it would definitely put them in a different dynamic. There'd be no leader. But if there's no leader, what's the point of the team anymore? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Let me know in the comments below on that. I liked I didn't like the whole Phoenix storyline. Just feels so jammed into this thing, so forced, and I can tell by listening to the commentary that they wanted it to do more. Specifically, Simon Kinberg, who we will mention again going forward in this series. He has something to do with the latest installation of the Phoenix storyline. He really wanted to tell this story, and I admire him for that. It's one of probably the biggest story that X-Men is known for. But there's no way that they can film the actual story from the comics. I just don't see. Maybe they could now, but it would take a lot of give and take from the audience. You'd have to introduce a lot of different stuff and show it in a certain way. Here, what I didn't like is how they've, and this is a fault of the story, is at least with the Cure, it just happens where with the Dark Phoenix story, you're bringing Jean Grey back. So we already know Jean. She's already been established, but now you're saying, okay, now we're going to focus on Jean, and she's had this superpower that we've all never known about. She's so powerful. She's the most powerful person that we've ever known, and we didn't say that in the last two movies, but we're saying it now. So that I didn't really like. It doesn't hold up. Plus, there's this introduction of the class system. No one in this room is above a class 3. No mutant. I've never come across this mutant that's not a class 5. Or that's a class 5. Jean Grey is the only class 5 mutant I ever came across. That's what Xavier says. And I'm just sitting there going, what is this class system that they're just talking about so easily? What? It's never been introduced. They don't even introduce it in this movie. They never sit down and explain what the class system is. And yeah, I know it's easy enough, and we can follow it enough. It's like, okay, class 3 is lower than class 5. Okay. But again, we've never been told that Jean was she was the most powerful mutant on the planet. No one's ever said that. They never set that up. They don't even explain it in this movie. Instead, it's just, she's just had this power all along, and we've never investigated it. I don't know. I think it goes against the movie. Goes against the characters too. It just kind of shows like it's something they never talked about. And Magneto, they have the big showdown. So Xavier gets killed. Magneto takes convinces the Phoenix to go along with her, or with him, and then he has no plan for her. He doesn't even use her in the final battle. She just stands in the background. Why? And she doesn't, another thing to the Phoenix, why does she not question Magneto? I mean, yeah, she says, "Oh, you sound just like him," and he says, "Oh, I want you to be who you are." But still, why should she want to be with you? Like he has no purpose for her. He just calls her a weapon, and she just stands off to the side. That really, it shows how dumb the Phoenix is, or how she obviously doesn't think for herself, and she wants to break away from Magneto, or from Xavier, just to go join Magneto. Doesn't make something about it doesn't add up, and that's the part of the comic that's much better told because of the way they do it. I don't want to give that away. But it's too long to get into, but it's much better, and it fits so much better than how this story's told. Instead, it's just, oh, well, I'll just go with Magneto because he wants me to be nature, and then he has no plan for her. He doesn't even use her in the battle. I'm trying to, I don't know, I already said that. Anyway, Angel, Warren Worthington III. Angel, one of the big characters of the X-Men lore, out of the Apocalypse storyline. Some of you may have know about that. He's one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse, and he's not that here. We're not dealing with Apocalypse yet, but here it is, this story, and he barely has anything to do. He shows up, his dad tries to cure him. He breaks out, flies away, goes to the X Mansion, and then he shows up at the end to save his dad from being killed from Magneto's group, and Ratner thought it was cool to work as a surprise. I disagree. I think he should have been fighting with them because he went to the X-Men. He could have joined the fight, and you could say, well, you could argue, well, he didn't know how to fight. They didn't have. You could show him training. He could have done some training. But on top of that, Ben Foster is absolutely ripped as this guy. So you could throw in add a through line explaining that he has some kind of battle, some kind of training. I think it would totally be believable if he would just join the team. And at one point, he was supposed to join the team, but they backed out just to have that surprise at the end. And I just think Angel's a pretty cool character, and he could have been used a lot better in this movie, especially with his dad, Worthington's father is the developer of the cure. There could have been a little more. You could play that out. And that leads me to the pacing. This movie moves way too fast. There's no time to get to know these characters or hang out with them. There's only a few moments I can think of, maybe with the Bobby Drake and Rogue storyline. There's a time where Iceman and Kitty Pryde go ice skating. That's a little touching movement where you kind of see their friendship blossoming, but also that's used to show Rogue's frustration with not being able to touch anybody. And she's convinced that leads her to join the lines of getting the cure, which again, it filters back into that cure storyline, which I think is much more powerful in this movie. And this movie has more to say about that and does a better job of explaining it rather than trying to get in this Dark Phoenix story and go that way where they just didn't have enough setup. And plus they just weren't willing to follow as much of the old story as they could. Instead, they picked out bits and pieces and tried to fit it in. It just ends up falling flat. Is the best way I can say it. It just falls flat. Now, obviously, in last year, 2019, we got our own Dark Phoenix film that specifically just focused on the Dark Phoenix storyline, and they still couldn't get that right. So this was the first of 2 times where they tried to go through the Dark Phoenix storyline, and we're going to get to the newer film 2019 in a few videos, but I'll have a lot to say about that movie. But still, I go back. It sounds like there's a lot of bad when you look at it. I mean, the deaths are unnecessary. The Phoenix storyline as a whole just falls flat because of how much setup that they lose. The death, and not to mention back to Cyclops, they don't even, the team doesn't even react to his death. He just, for one, it's not, they should show his death. Instead, it's just kind of hinted at. They don't really show it. I think I'm not calling for violence. I'm not sitting here like, oh, I want to see him die. I want to see him tortured. No, you could have at least shown it to confirm it to the audience, but instead they don't show it, which I think is a problem, but okay. They tell us. And even though we're there, the movies to watch, not to be told. And it's and certain times, yes, it works to be told. Sometimes it doesn't. I think this doesn't. I think he should have shown a little more confirmation. Instead, he's just gone. And they don't even react. The team barely reacts. They don't even formulate, oh, wow, she killed Scott. What would have caused her to do that? Professor X could have tried to see what happened. He couldn't. And he's supposed to be, he's supposed to be able to do that. He can't. And Wolverine finds out. So they really did a disservice to Cyclops. But that leads me back to the final battle. Wolverine, you can tell his arc is to, at first he's not part of the team. I'm not a team player. I'm just passing through. And then by the end, he's leading the team. And I get that arc. It makes sense for that character. Okay, he's not a team player, then he's a team player. But Cyclops, and I just don't know if he's the leader. Even in this sense, I think it makes more sense for Storm to be the leader, because she's even said at the beginning, there's a little foreshadowing line that really kind of sticks out now for those of us that have seen the movie, that Xavier tells Storm, "Oh, you're going to take my place. I thought you'd take my place someday." Wink, wink. And then when it comes down to it, she's just the co-captain behind Wolverine's leadership. I think that it would have been so much better if they would have just had Cyclops. He's the leader of the team. That's the way the X-Men are. I know people can. Some of you may think that it's better to have people die, or it's more, but people can, sometimes the leader gets killed and you have to adjust, and that's all true. I'm just saying, from an X-Men fan of the lore, and even for this movie, and I felt it even when I was 13 watching this, it just didn't feel organic to have. It just didn't feel right to have Wolverine be the total leader. He's supposed to be just a good supporter and a strong member of the team. Not that most of the stuff he did was wrong. He can still be a major player in this movie. But to be the leader, I don't know. To me, it just feels wrong. Maybe you have a different perspective. Let me know. Of course, again, down in the comments below. So overall, I'd say the action and the special effects still hold up pretty well. And I think the Cure storyline is very captivating and interesting to watch. You see how the Brotherhood reacts to it. I think Magneto leading his kind of becoming a cult leader, or leading the fight against it is interesting. I think it has a lot. The movie has a lot to say, or interesting things to say about the Cure storyline, and I think it could have developed them more if they would have just focused on that. Not to mention the movie's only 100 minutes long. That's barely an hour and a half. It could have actually went on a little longer. Gave us time to breathe. Instead, this movie's very fast with its action. It's go here. We gotta find Jean. Where did Jean go? Now we gotta go to her house. The house blows up. Now we gotta have a funeral. Now we gotta find Magneto. Now we gotta go to the final battle and go to Alcatraz Island. And we see the bridge. It's just go, go, go. It's slow down. I mean, I was amazed at how fast this movie went by. And I don't know. For me, the X-Men, they're a cool group. I think it's fun to, even if you add in a couple of subplots, I think it's great to hang out with them for a while, and just be with them and create these, give us some more characterization. Let us see some more, but instead we get a beat 'em up action heavy piece that's only barely an hour and a half long, and it just kind of goes through. It's got some good points, but I guess the more X-Men quality, or the more parts of the story that really make the X-Men a little more interesting, are just kind of breezed by, and it's okay. If you like action, you probably liked it. If not, I like a lot of it, but there's a lot of it that I don't like. So I'd probably say I'd say 50-50, and it's worth a rent if you don't own it. Maybe check it out if you like the X-Men movies. If not, then you probably want to skip it. And if you're a real hardcore X-Men fan, then you might want to skip it too. But anyway, let me know what your thoughts. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I forgot to mention. Are there any more points that need to be made? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat about it. And you can also subscribe or share this video or like it, and be on board for all the future ones down the road as we continue this X-Men series. So thanks everybody for watching, and I'll be back in the next video. Take care.